Welcome to Picture Perspective. My name's Jordan Kennedy. Today, I have the pleasure of having a fellow partner of mine, Jake Berger, to talk all things employee share schemes. Jake, let's get into it.
Sounds great.
Before we kick off, a reminder, this is general advice in nature. Should you wish to seek personal advice, please reach out to your advisor. So Jake, let's start with the basics. Employee share schemes, what are they? Why are they so attractive for employers to implement?
Thanks, Jordan. So an employee share scheme is basically just when the company, an employer, grants shares or options, or, some kind of rights to shares to an employee. Importantly, most people think of it as like a traditional ESOP, where we've got this little piece of paper and we give it to you, but it can really be anything. It can be a verbal promise, it can be in a shareholders agreement, it can arise in a lot of different contexts. Why are they so attractive? There are several reasons why. I guess, firstly, they're often seen as kind of a cheap way to...
No cash.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in reality, they actually, I guess, are not always that cheap because they dilute the other shareholders, so you've got to take that into account. They're also, seen as something that rewards tenure and loyalty.
Yeah, locks people in.
Spot on. In certain circumstances, it's simply just the peers. If you are a startup, you need to have one of those. It's kind of just...
Well, it used to always be like tech companies used to be big with these sort of things, but it's any industry, any company, shape, size.
Yeah, look, spot on. I would say there are some industries where it's a natural fit and some where it's not necessarily a natural fit, and you often get problems where you have someone who hears about an ESS and wants to put one in, but it's not necessarily the right product for them.
And is there a right time and juncture of the business's evolution to implement one? Or is it, day one, startup land, let's do it? Or is it when it gets a little bit more mature? What sort of timing do you look at?
Good question. It really depends. So I guess, a natural time often is kind of within the first year or two. Especially because early on, you can often access what's called the startup concessions, and generally if you're able to access them, there's no reason why you'd do anything else. Like, they are just a fantastic concession.
While we're there, tell us what are the concessions for in startup phase?
Yeah, okay. So startup concessions, really it's kind of three concessions in one. So the first concession that you get is that you're straight on to what's called capital account, which means you get concessional treatment. So it means that when there's an eventual sale of the option or the share, you potentially get the CGT discount.
Yep, so same rules. If you hold it for more than 12 months, you get a 50% discount, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Yep.
Whereas ordinarily, you'd get taxed at marginal rates for the ESS regime. So it gives you that advantage of getting a concessional tax rate. So that's the first concession. The second one is, in order to get into the startup concessions, you need to have a thought to what the value of the share is, the underlying share, either because options have to be priced at that price, or if you issue shares, you can do it at a maximum of 15% discount. But you have to therefore turn your mind to what is the value of these shares.
Yep.
What you can do in certain circumstances under the startup concessions is you can rely on what's called the net tangible asset approach, which essentially allows you to completely disregard IP, goodwill, all those things that actually are of value but are not on your balance sheet.
Wow.
Makes it firstly much easier to determine the value, because you just print out what's the balance sheet. Okay, well, that's the value. But secondly, because you're disregarding all of these things, IP, goodwill, that potentially have significant value, and if you think about a startup, IP is normally the most valuable thing there. It allows you to set a much smaller exercise price in the context of options, for example, which potentially, as a owner of the business, means you don't have to dilute yourself as much. You can give away less equity because they're getting value from day one.
Yeah.
The third concession is really kind of just a bit of a technical concession, which is normally when you exercise an option, you reset the acquisition date for the purposes of working out the CGT discount.
Start date, yep.
With the startup concessions, you don't. So it means you can exercise the option, get the share. You don't have to wait 12 months after that before you sell the share.
Okay. Interesting. And from an employee's lens, it's great to have the buzzwords and the acronyms, and your boss comes in and goes, "Hey, we're going to issue you some shares." Is there education that you would go through to the employee as well to make sure they understand and the employer or the issuer is getting the bang for their buck in what they're trying to whether it's locking somebody in or something like that? Is that a journey that you go through in advising there?
Completely. And I would say, we've seen employee share schemes that have gone terribly wrong, or at least, the board has spent, countless amounts of time and money putting a scheme in place, and then you go and speak to the employees and they just don't value it.
Yeah, or it's too complex.
And so you think, why have you guys put this complicated scheme in place that you thought was fantastic for employees? You thought that it was going to incentivise them, and the employees don't even understand what's going on. So I'd say communication is key. And so that can often be, having us or having someone come out and explain it to the employees, and ideally really taking a video of that or having a frequently asked questions or something so that people can come back to it, or, fact sheets, all that kind of stuff. But the other kind of important thing is simplicity. So I think when you're doing a scheme, if you're doing a scheme for all the employees in the organisation, you want it to be as simple as possible. If you're doing a scheme for the execs, that's where you can kind of get a little bit more tailored.
Dial it to get the outcomes that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and specifically probably where you can get more complex is tax planning. So if you're not in the startup concessions and you want to get them a better tax outcome, is there a way that you can do it? And also in the KPIs that you measure them on. So I would say for your average employee, just do it tenure-based. They don't need some complicated KPI. For the average employee, it's just if you're here in 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, whatever the distance that you want it to be. For the execs, where their actions impact the share price, the return,
success.
Whether they sign this deal, all that kind of stuff. Well, for them, maybe it's appropriate to have more detailed KPIs.
So, Jake, we've talked about the value for startup businesses in setting up an employee share scheme. What other types of businesses is it relevant for?
Yeah, so I'd say the kind of two traditional users of employee share schemes are either listed companies or startups. Essentially, not always even startups, just entities that are targeting an exit. And I guess the reasons for that is listeds, it's quite easy to manage the tax implications because, you grant someone some shares, they get assessed on it, but they can just sell half the shares or all the shares, or they can just try to pay the tax bill themselves, but at least they've got a liquid asset that helps them to deal with it. Startups, or at least someone that's planning an exit, that's one of the great things about an employee share scheme. It's just a natural ticket to play in an exit event, and that's really the big incentive. Where it becomes a bit more challenging is a private company that's not targeting an exit. And so let's say you really want to get a dividend play, you want someone to be able to share in dividends. That can be very challenging to do. Probably the other context where it's used a little bit is succession planning, but there's challenges with that because all of the concessions start to tap out at 10%.
Yeah. And if we've got a plan in place and for whatever reason, you're hopeful that you're using an employee share scheme to retain as many people as we can, but the odd person's going to want to jump off the boat. How do you deal with those sort of events in sort of unwinding somebody that's in a plan? Yeah.
So I guess the first thing that I'd mention is my advice generally is very rarely to give people shares. So give people options. And one of the reasons for that is options are very easy to unwind. Shares are far more difficult, both from a kind of corporate law perspective, which is obviously not something I can advise on, but something that I've seen lawyers having to do a lot of work around that. But also from a tax perspective, it's far more complicated to take away shares. But I guess, there's that philosophical good leaver, bad leaver provisions and how to manage them. So you'll see some companies where their view will be basically you have to be around until the end. So you have to be around until the exit point. If you leave at any point before that, you're dead to us. There are some that might say, look, you've done your 4 years, you've done your 5 years, you decided to go somewhere else, but over that period you earned some value, and so you're allowed to keep those options and still eventually play in an exit event. Again, I think it's really just this philosophical, how do the owners think about it?
Yeah, and the other one which jumps out to me, I'm a shareholder. As an employee, I get a say. I'm at the table, my views are going to be heard, going to be listened to, and I help steer the ship. I'm assuming, from an owner's perspective, although everybody's ideas are great ideas and you want to embrace them, how do you sort of steer that dialogue to say, look, you are a shareholder, but we're still leading the direction of the business?
Yeah, look, once again, I would say that relates to the earlier comments of, for your average employee, make it simple, keep them as option holders only. For kind of execs, maybe it makes sense to bring them in as shareholders and have them reap the benefits of genuine ownership. So, reap the benefits of dividends and being able to have a vote.
Vote and stuff, yeah.
I mean, what you do see sometimes is that the plan will have something in place where people can have shares but they don't have voting rights. So either there'll be a power of attorney over their voting rights, or their shares will be held in a employee share trust, which will be able to exercise the votes. Or sometimes you'll even see that it's just a different class of shares that doesn't have voting rights. So I would say voting rights, in many ways, it's rare to give those up.
You wouldn't want to give the whole crowd.
And this is one of those things commercially, scheme design is critical. So really thinking through how you want this scheme to operate. So do you actually want people to be shareholders, your employees? Do you actually want them to vote? And so you really need to plan for those things beforehand, because we've seen some disaster cases where, people just got off the shelf plans, the cheap plans, they didn't really understand them. And then suddenly people are exercising options and becoming shareholders, and that could create tax implications and commercial implications. So it's really, I guess, being considered at the beginning and going through it with someone who has some experience and has seen some battle stories.
Tell some stories, yeah.
Exactly.
So you touched on a little bit, but if somebody was looking or thinking or contemplating going down this path, where would they start? Obviously reaching out to someone like yourself or somebody in the team to talk through, but go through that detailed planning phase.
Yeah, so I think it's really kind of like normally like a 3-stage process. So normally there'd be kind of, I guess, a consulting process of, these are the different types of plans. What kind of plan are you interested in? What kind of plan fits best for, the outcomes that you're seeking to achieve? So decide upon the plan, and then once you've decided on the plan, there's then tweaking, what good lever, bad lever provisions do you want?
So it's just all those tailoring phases.
Yeah.
It's not a off the shelf because it can end in disaster. It's the more tailored, but not making it so prescriptive that it's complex to administer, you fall into traps. So there's a fine line between complexity and simplicity in design.
Yeah, and it's making sure that the employer or whoever's going to be administering and implementing the plan understands it.
Yeah.
Because, so often they just don't understand it. Or alternatively, the person who did understand it leaves, and then you're left with the new CFO coming in or the new head of HR who's trying to,
juggle a plan that it wasn't his and he didn't create it. Doesn't own it. Excellent. Well, Jake, thank you very much for your time. Really insightful. If anybody would like to reach out to Jake to get further information or have an additional conversation, please feel free to do so.
Thanks, Jordan. Thanks for having me, mate.
Thanks.